Hello and welcome to the second episode on this series of Practical UK Survival. Now, in the last episode we looked at the kind of common scenarios you're likely to face while you're out and about enjoying the UK countryside, and in this episode we're going to talk about the sort of survival kit that I carry to deal with those sort of situations. Now, as this series is aimed squarely at regular folk who enjoy using the outdoors rather than survivalists or preppers, we won't be talking about a complete breakdown of society, and there won't be a whiff of a government conspiracy. This is just practical advice for regular folk who enjoy using the UK countryside. When it comes to survival kit, it actually starts with your clothing system, because that's your primary line of defence against the elements. It protects you from the sun in the summertime and from the wind and the rain in the wintertime. You can almost think of it as a one-man portable shelter system, because that's exactly what it is. Now, your clothing system is so important, I'm going to do a dedicated video later in the series. For now, just be aware that your clothing system needs to be flexible in order to deal with a range of different temperatures, so you should always have at least one extra insulation layer which stays warm when it's wet, and always have protection from at least the wind and the rain too. Another set of items absolutely vital for our survival kit, and quite often overlooked, is our navigation aids, because we're never that far from a road in the UK, so we can normally walk away out of most situations if we know how to navigate. And it can literally be the difference between a planned walk on a crisp winter's afternoon to getting lost in the Black Mountains and having to overnight without the proper equipment. Another reason that we might not be able to walk out of a situation is if we've had some kind of a first aid incident, and that can either leave us exposed to the elements, so we succumb to things like hypothermia, or that first aid incident could be life-threatening on its own, for example if you have a major bleed. So a small first aid kit like this one is absolutely essential to carry in your survival kit and should be with you at all times. Now, this is such an important part of our survival kit that I am going to do a dedicated video on this later on in this series. If for some reason you're unable to self-rescue, then you're going to need something in order to signal for help with. And in most cases in the UK, that's just going to be a simple mobile phone, because a mobile phone is a great tool and it will get you straight through to the emergency services. Now, if you are going to carry a mobile, and I recommend that you do, I also recommend you have one that has a waterproof rating, or at least get a waterproof cover for it, because quite often in that emergency situation, it could well be really bad weather, and so you're definitely going to want your phone to be waterproof. Now, I've also got to tell you, there are places in the UK where this isn't going to work because you're just not going to get a signal. Now, in those situations, because the UK is really sort of densely populated, then you can usually just use something like this, which is a simple distress whistle. And these are really cheap and they're really light. Now, this is actually effective up to about 800 meters in the right conditions, and the way you call for help is you give 6 short blasts followed by a minute's silence, and then you repeat. And if anybody hears that, they should respond with 3 short blasts. Now, that's signalling, by sound, and it's a really useful one to have. What I also recommend you carry is some form of illumination, like a torch. And a torch like this is such an important thing to have that I actually carry 3. I have a main torch, which is always in my pocket, ready to go. And then I have a backup in my bag, like a spare battery. I just take a whole torch. Then I also have a third method, which is like an LED glow stick or just like a light stick, because that way I can use that to leave with a casualty if I've got to leave somebody and go and get help. Or alternatively, if I'm with a group, I need to keep those together, I can put that light stick on the back of my rucksack, or if I get to a road, because it'll help me be seen on the road. If you're unable to move, maybe you're waiting for rescue, then you may need some form of shelter. And for most people who are just out enjoying a day's walk in the countryside and not planning to stay out, then I would recommend something like this, which is a simple survival bag. And all this is, it's a really thick, heavy-duty plastic bag that you climb into, and it just gets you out the wind and the rain. Now, although it won't be the most comfortable night, and the condensation will certainly build up in this, it can be the difference between life and death. Another great option, and something I tend to prefer at the moment, is this, which is a poncho. Now, ponchos are really good because they don't need to take up any extra space or weight in your bag, because this can replace your waterproof jacket and it gives you a lot more coverage. Now, the great thing about ponchos as well is, you can wear your shelter while you're kind of walking out and trying to self-rescue. But if you do need to stay in location, you can just put the poncho on, sit down. You've got to be protected across your bum, against the rain, and the rest of you and your kit is going to be out the elements, and it will definitely keep those elements out. So it's a really good bit of kit. Now, if you buy a military style poncho, they have reinforced grommets around the end, and these are little holes so that you can actually tie them up to a tree and make like a lean-to shelter. So it's a fantastic bit of kit. And because shelter's so important, I'm actually going to do a separate video on this later on in the series, and I'll show you how to make a poncho shelter there. If you are going to use a poncho and you're considering making a poncho shelter, it's also worth just putting a small kit together like this, which is your cordage to tie it up with, tent pegs, and a small folding pocket knife. It just makes all the difference and makes it really quick to deploy. And the next set of items I recommend you carry are to do with your fire starting equipment. Now, it's pretty rare to actually need a fire in the UK as opposed to just want one, but when you do need one, you really do need it. And the difference between lighting a fire for survival purposes and lighting a fire for bushcraft is when it comes to survival, you want something that is quick, something that is reliable, and something that is very, very easy. You get no points at all for rubbing two sticks together. You just want something that you're going to be able to get going very quickly. So it definitely pays to carry a few items, and these are what I recommend you carry. So first of all, you need some form of fire starter, some sort of ignition. I like a lighter, and this is just a turbojet lighter. I think these burn a little bit hotter than the regular type. And I tend to pay a little bit more because I want something that is reliable. I don't just get the cheapest thing on eBay. The next thing you should carry is some sort of backup ignition source. So either another lighter, or what I carry, something different, is a ferrocerium rod. Now, ferrocerium rods are good because they just create a spark, but there's no moving parts to these, so they will work in all weathers and they're very reliable. You just throw a spark, and as long as you have the right type of tinder, you can get a fire going with that in all weathers and all conditions. Now, because it does require the right type of tinder, I recommend you carry tinder as well. Now, my favourite tinder to carry is actually tampons, because these are small, they're light, and because they're really compressed in there, you actually get quite a lot. There's enough in that tampon to start at least 4 fires, so they're really easy to carry for tinder. But when you just open that up, pull it out, you get this really nice fine tinder material, and that'll catch a spark really easily. Now, the thing is about this tinder is it doesn't burn for very long, so you need some way of extending that flame. So you need some kind of flame extender. And what I carry for that is petroleum jelly, just a little tin like this, or you can use a chapstick as well. Chapstick is another good way of doing it. And all you do is you open that up, you rub your tinder in that, close it down, and then you can just light it straight away. And that should burn for at least a couple of minutes. So it's a really easy way of getting a fire going, and that's definitely something I would recommend you carry. And almost last on our list is water, and that's because we can typically survive a few days without it, even though it wouldn't be the most comfortable days, if I'm honest. Now, it's still worth mentioning because it can extend the time you can survive, and also it can make your life a lot more comfortable. There are also situations where actually having water can make the difference. For example, if someone is going hypothermic, then actually getting a hot drink into them can be the real difference between life and death. So for the average sort of casual user who's just out in the countryside for a day's walk and is not planning on overnighting or spending an extended amount of time, what I recommend is something like this, which are chlorine tablets. And chlorine tablets are fantastic because they're light, they are very cheap, and they're very effective against bacteria and viruses. They have a really good long shelf life as well, so you can just put these in this bag and they're going to last a good few years in your bag. Now, this little strip here weighs next to nothing. There's 10 there, and that is enough to purify 10 litres of water. So that will easily get you through a couple of days. So great bit of kit, and that's what I'd recommend for your average casual user. Now, the most reliable method of purifying water is always going to be boiling, but you do need something to boil it in, and your average sort of casual user might not be carrying that. Now, if that's something you really do want to do, then you needn't have anything particularly heavy or particularly expensive. You can just get something like this, and this is just a 420ml titanium cup. This cost about £6 on Amazon, and what you can do with this is you can easily put this onto a fire, or you can put a couple of solid fuel blocks in there, balance it on a couple of sticks or a couple of stones or something, and you can easily boil water on this one. Just make sure you get one that is single walled and not double walled if you're sort of putting this next to a heat source, because you don't want it to kind of explode or anything. But these are really cheap, really efficient, and they are kind of worth having if you want to boil water. And last on the list are just a couple of miscellaneous items that I always recommend you carry because they have a multitude of uses. Now the first one is a length of cordage, something like a paracord or a microcord, because you can use this for so many things. You could use it to rig up a poncho shelter, you could replace your boot laces, maybe even act as an emergency or a temporary lead if you've got the dogs. There's so many uses for this, so always carry a length of cordage in your kit. The second thing I always recommend you have is a length of duct tape, because duct tape again has loads of different uses. You can use this to repair your clothes, to your rain fly on your tent, to your tarp or your poncho, even your boots, if your sole starts coming off. And if the worst comes to the worst, you can even patch up and hold yourself together with one of these. If you need to get a really tight pressure bandage on, you could use a bit of duct tape for this. And it's great for fire starting as well. You just rip a small amount off, light it with a lighter, and this will burn for quite a long time. So it's a really good thing to have in your bag. And the final thing I'd have in your bag is this, which is the space blanket. And again, 101 uses. And in the next episode, we're going to cover clothing in a lot more detail, because there's a little bit more to this than meets the eye. So it's definitely worth catching that video. And over the whole series, we'll be covering the following topics. So if you don't want to miss the next video or anything else in this list, think about subscribing, hit the notification bell, and I will see you there.